Welcome everyone, good afternoon from the TCI network. Welcome to this global webinar on how economic development organizations and clusters are helping today and preparing for the new normal. Today we can start, I think, with a positive message. We can say that in most of the world, the worst of the coronavirus pandemic is over. We are still processing the consequences and adopting different routines than just a couple of months ago, but we are slowly recovering our lives, meeting friends, family, and eventually some of you meeting your colleagues also in your workplaces. Some of us, we are a little bit more slow, but we see the light at the end of the tunnel. And this relative normality means also that the work on restarting growth has started. For those of us who work in economic development, we need to put in place new strategies for long-term growth. And we want to take this chance to make it better. Yeah? In TCI Network, we believe that clusters and innovation ecosystems can provide proactive ideas and collaborative solutions to bring us to a new place. A better place, more innovative, more inclusive, and more sustainable. We also see that economic development organizations that make at a great extent our TCI membership base can play a key role, a pivotal role in making this happen. And we want to help you all in this journey. We want to offer you different elements that help you to adopt the strategic direction that can guide you in the upcoming months. For that, we are currently developing a TCI recovery playbook, which is a dynamic guide to help economic development practitioners to navigate in the time of coronavirus. We have circulated the first draft by Christian Kettles. Hello, Christian, I see you connected also, and Merete, Daniel Nielsen. We have circulated that among our members. We are receiving excellent feedback from over the world. We are also identifying some inspiring cases of how the members of the TCI network are helping today and preparing for tomorrow. And today with this webinar, we want to offer you two live examples of two leading organizations in Denmark and in Upper Austria to learn firsthand from their protagonists what they are doing to help clusters and innovation ecosystems transitioning into the new normal. So what is the plan for today? We have 90 minutes to go through some guiding questions that we have asked our speakers to cover. We are going to use the three-phase model that we have presented also in the TCI recovery playbook, from mobilizing for crisis response to living with the pandemic and then igniting the new growth. And I want to welcome you all, our participants in this webinar. We have more than 250 registrants, great interest from all over the world, cluster organizations from Australia to Canada, economic development agencies, multilateral organizations. I went through the list and I could see mails from the World Bank, UNIDO, Inter-American Development Bank, Asia Development Bank. And I would like to highlight also that I recognize full teams participating, full units today of the many stakeholders from the same region participating. I think we all understand that the new times require a shift also in our collaboration model and collaboration dynamics. Welcome everyone. Please make use of the chat to make comments, questions, analysis. We will try to intercalate during the conversation with the speakers. For your information, we will be recording this webinar for later dissemination among the members of the TCI network. We are very lucky to count with two great speakers from the TCI network, the two of them with long background in economic development and cluster support. And they daily think how to make their territories, their clusters and their business more innovative, more sustainable, and help the territories also. Merete, Daniel Nielsen is our TCI president. Today she will talk in her role as co-founder and director of Cluster Excellence Denmark, which is the organization in charge of implementing the Danish cluster strategy, supporting cluster organizations on competence development, professionalization, internationalization. Welcome, Merete. Thanks for being with us today. And the second speaker is Werner Pamminger. Werner is CEO at Business Upper Austria, the business agency of the state of Upper Austria. He's a well-known expert in cluster management and has been responsible for Clusterland Upper Austria, which is a cluster program and community that is considered a model for excellence in cluster management in Europe. And Werner has been serving in the TCI board of directors for a long time also. Welcome, Werner. Welcome, everyone. Let me share the presentation with all of you, and we start. There it is. Can you see it? Yeah. Okay, this is the first part, mobilizing for crisis response. And we want to see how economic development organizations are interacting with clusters in response to the crisis, and how are they connecting clusters with support mechanisms available. This was most of all at the beginning of the crisis response, but some of them might be still in place, and some will stay for longer. So, Merete, please, I give you the floor.
Thank you, Patricia. Thank you for this opportunity to talk about my other job, the real job I have in Cluster Excellence Denmark. And since I knew that was a really high level of participation for this one, I thought, okay, still not everybody might know where is Denmark. And what is the current status on things in Denmark. And I don't want to go deep on that, but just highlighting that for quite so many years that Denmark has been very focused on are we among the innovation leaders? We are at the forefront primarily because we invest quite heavily in this, and still lack to be better on the commercialization and bringing more knowledge into companies. So it might be a supermodel, and we still also have, on the current status with the corona here, a lot about the welfare model we have. It might be a strong way of leading us away to the crisis. We hope that. But let's see. So we might be high on innovation and business development, but we also believe in very, good values in life. We have this Danish concept of hygge, that we are among the happiest country in the world, and we're very proud of that as well. So very brief on Denmark. The second slide, and just to frame the context a bit about what we are doing, because opposed to Werner's organization, Cluster Denmark is not an economic development organization. We are part of, as you mentioned, Patricia, a big national focus on clusters. And innovation is our focus area, and the clusters are part of lifting that. But over the last 2 years, we spent a lot of resources of both analyzing the strongholds in Denmark, doing classical cluster mapping, and also mapping the strongholds on the university side, and putting that on top of each other. That kind of defined 10 strongholds in Denmark. And for the last year, there's been a public hearing, we've done workshops, and then first this year we had a final strategy. Okay, this is the 10 areas of specialization. We have 2 emerging ones, and this is the way we are going ahead. And this has really been on the table in my organization, that we need to go from these 40 clusters down to 12 clusters. So majority of what we're doing is really consolidating the cluster landscape, and trying to make like real consolidations and real mergers, and not like just putting things on top of each other. And actually tomorrow we have our call for the national program. The deadline is up tomorrow, and it's 2 ministries have been coordinating that call, and it's around 90 million euros for 4 years. So of course there's a lot of competition on that, and we spend in my place also a lot of time coordinating between the 2 ministries. So the next slide, please. So so what is the role we have in Cluster Excellence Denmark? Is basically, as you said, Patricia, we are about supporting Danish clusters, but it's not financial support. We leave that to the ministries or other funding sources. So this is kind of the service portfolio. We have dialogue with the leading ministry. 2 of those, it's Ministry of the Ministry of Higher Education and Science. It's been about consolidating the cluster organizations, but when we went on that journey, we found out, okay, this is actually more about consolidating the ecosystems around the clusters. And this was perhaps even good for us with the corona, because we were able to really reach out to many the ecosystem when this happened. Then, of course, we also work with internationalization. It's a minor thing. It's all the first three areas that are the really core areas in what we do, but internationalization is definitely still a part of what we do. We also work with professionalization, but because of the consolidation, it's not really been the target, but we are still very leaned on this European Cluster Excellence label. So all the new clusters should have a gold label or apply for one. And we do a lot of sharing of experiences. We don't do trainings, we don't do other things, but this is another service we do. And then promoting the value of clusters, because we might know clusters are important, but we need to push it to the outside world, and that's also part of what we do. So the next slide, please. Yeah, and then Corona-19 happened. And I mean, the good part for us is that we are in really big daily online communication with the clusters already, and when this happened, we could push that even more online. So like others, we very fast became experts on Zoom and Teams and doing many interactions. The good part is that the managers were actually available. So normally they are very busy and they're out traveling, and now we had a lot of time to talk to them, 1 hour, 2 hours, and really engaging with many of the managers and having really good discussions. Yeah, so the next slide, Patricia. And some of the first things we discussed, and this might be a good example of what we did early on, so this is in Danish, sorry for this, but so a lot was, of course, the internal crisis communication. How do you actually communicate in times of crisis? Because this was a bit new to us in the Danish case. And we were really interested in hearing how have the clusters responded, how do you communicate with your companies, how do you work with digital tools. We also actually did something together with TCI early on, trying to make an overview of different online tools, because all of us had to become world experts in very little time. And really try to understand how do you communicate in the proper way, because some sectors are really struggling, while others might actually have new possibilities or new opportunities or solutions to offer, and how to do that in a manner that is not like inappropriate. And then we also became experts on infographics. So instead of doing very long, boring minutes, then we said this is a great way of communicating. So this is a bit on the internal thing in Cluster Excellence Denmark, what we learned on that. Then the next one. Then we also have on our own homepage a subsection where we try to upload early on what are the current aid packages from the government, because it was actually quite difficult to get an overview. So we try to give the clusters the right information, and then the clusters could pass it on to their companies. And in general, our clusters, they reach out to around a little bit below 19,000 companies. So we also thought that was a way of getting the information out there. As I said, on the digital tools, we also made different overviews. So we try to keep that updated, and that's also on our homepage. We also wanted to see how have this affected the services our clusters are offering the companies, and I'll go back to that in depth. But we also so everything we did over the last 2 months is basically online and this when available when the clusters want to tap in. Yes, the next one, please. Then, of course, as I mentioned, we also work with internationalization around our clusters, and we could see so many bad things happening. So we wanted to reach out to our clusters saying, okay, what is the current status? How do you see this picture? And of course, it was also because more of our other economic development organization reached out to us saying, yeah, but what is happening in this area, and how can we to move this ahead? So we found it very timely to engage with 15 of our cluster managers, and they sent us, were happy to join this webinar and gave us different examples of what they'd be doing. And we were actually positive about this, because we are all of us thought, okay, on one hand, are we getting more skeptical about, global collaboration, because now we can only rely on ourselves and the local producers. And as Werner last talked about in the beginning, for many years, internationalization has been about collaborating with the Nordics or with Germany, but this was really for projects with Japan or US or Brazil that was of course postponed, but also trying to handle in different ways. And one of the first examples is on this global investor pitching, where our local, actually very small clusters on gaming, but it did a very cool investor meeting. And we could all be quite skeptical about that, because doing things, meeting people online for investors, perhaps not the best idea. But actually they were able to have more meetings, they were able to engage with more important investors, and the outcome of the meeting was actually better. So this was quite impressive outcome. We also have some examples now on online international matchmaking events. So there are actually tools out there. So it's not like just meeting by writing, but you can actually have one-on-one meetings. I think it was also part of the investor pitching that you could meet one-on-one. So those tools are out there. I know Enterprise Youth Network have that tool. And I'm going to see a test of that quite soon, but it's a very nice way of being able to interact and meet online. And then the next example is Patricia. Yeah, and for us, the core in the cluster system is this international knowledge matchmaking, and what's important to see how are the clusters handling this, and what kind of interaction that they're able to do. And we also again had quite good feedback that it is possible to even kickstart new projects. It's also possible to attract more high-level researchers right now because they have more time. So that was also a very positive upside to this. And there were also more concept development, because people had a little time in the summer houses or back home saying, okay, could we rethink this a bit, and how do we actually move ahead? So my own organization, so we might not be a proper public economic development agency, but we have a lot of interaction with Enterprise Youth Network or the Foreign Ministry, or we have 8 innovation centers around the world. So we had a lot of dialogue with them also over the last 2 months on, okay, how do we kickstart things again? How can we reshape our services? Also the cluster services. So that's been a very intense couple of months, and we really try to refocus a lot here. Okay.
Excellent. Thanks, Merete. Sorry to say, but there is some problem with your connection. Any chances to get improved, because we lose you from time to time? Sorry for that. Yeah. Meanwhile, Werner, before I give you the word, I have to say that I love the next picture. And now, there you are.
Yeah, well, I mean, this basically sums up our situation quite well. I mean, we had actually, just like Denmark, quite a prosperous decade, the last 10 years. After the financial crisis, we had growth around 3% per year, and we were going from one high-level employment record to the next one. Actually, we were within a situation in 2018, 2019, where we had quite a bit of labor shortage, to be honest. And this was one of the main problems of our companies. They said the main limitation factor of growth is actually the lack of skilled labor. And with a population of 1.4 million, Upper Austria had like 35,000 people in skilled labor missing, more than 8,000 IT experts in our region. So what we, and we thought we had a really excellent plan here in our regional development agency to set up a own department for the issue of HR management, for trying to attract skilled labor from other countries, to go massively into re-education, all those things in order to overcome the lack of skilled labor in those days after 10 years of growth. And well, suddenly, I mean, we experienced that kind of crisis we really did not expect at all, and which was after 10 years of growth, of course, quite actually shocking to the whole system, to come from one extreme, from unemployment rate of 3.3%, which is basically full employment, to one of the highest unemployments in recent histories within a couple of weeks and months. And that's why we also, as a regional development agency, thought we had a really smart plan. We had scheduled a lot of activities in Eastern European countries to attract IT experts and so on. But everything kind of changed overnight through this crisis. And what we did, and Patricia, please, the next slide,
yes.
Is we changed actually course more or less overnight. So in times of crisis, of course, it means all hands on decks right away. And like in other countries, the state, the federal state and the state of Upper Austria came up with emergency packages for funding companies in various forms. And to be clear, we as Clusterland or Business Upper Austria, we are not a funding agency. We don't fund companies or enterprises at our own behalf, but what we did, we obtained a mandate from the regional government to actually help all companies within our region to obtain and have access to all different forms of funding, because we saw that the agencies like the Ministry of Finance, the Ministry of Labor, the Regional Economic Department, all those organizations, they were more or less overwhelmed by the demand and by what was needed there by the companies in times of those crises. And what we did within actually with 2.5 weeks, we set up a task force consisting of 50 people. So it was really a massive effort of our structure to help companies within our region to obtain this kind of funds. So our goal was to reach out to 1,000 companies a week. Or to be honest, we didn't really achieve that. It was rather than 700 to 800 a week, and to ask if they actually would need certain advice on the various emergency relief packages that there are out. And what we learned through this exercise is that the companies were really thankful that there was an organization out there, not being there for their questions and answers, but to actually actively reaching out to them. So of course we had this emergency telephone numbers and those kind of things, and we were able to by companies to be reached by themselves, but our overall objective was to reach out actively to a lot of companies within the region, not just cluster partners, but to the whole variety of different companies in our region. And the feedback we obtained was very positive, and I think with reaching out to a great number, more than 3,000 companies at the moment, we also seeded the plant for what is coming in the future, which means it's not just obtaining emergency funding to obtain liquidity in the short run, but it is about gaining competitive advantages again for future growth. And it's not just getting access to those funds, but to obtain access to R&D funding within the next probably month and years, because I'm quite convinced that in our case, where we rely very much on industry, our GDP is derived 32% from manufacturing, high precision, high value added manufacturing. The only way to get out of this crisis again will be innovation and gaining again competitive advantage on the world markets. I will come back to that later on, because we rely heavily on international relations and exports, because our actual community is rather small compared to what we need to get prosperous there.
Thank you very much. Merete, one question for you from the audience. How many of these new ways of communication that you were mentioning do you think will stay, or which ones will stay?
Oh, it's a really good question. I could imagine that a lot of the online will keep on, be there, because it's a part, as you just experienced, sometimes you have ICT problem and then it's not so great, but it's been a good learning for us that we talked a lot about meeting online and communicating online. And now we had a really push on going forward on that, and many have learned it the hard way. And so I think that the online communication will be there. I think some of the other communication forms will also be in place, because we might not know for how long this will last. I mean, now we are optimistic and we can see, we can reopen the society, but we will not know if the virus comes back and how this will, develop over the next half year or year. So I think a lot what we learned in the early phases will actually stay on for quite a while.
Excellent. I see also some comments. Of course, the material will be available after this. You will receive an email with the presentation and the video recording if you want to revisit some of the things that we are going through today. And Merete, someone is asking if you can share Globalization Goes Digital through clusters, lessons from Denmark with everyone. We need more material.
Yeah, of course I can. I could also see it wasn't perhaps not so easy to read on the screen here, but I'm happy to do that. We can send it out for everybody, so no problem.
Okay.
We also put it on European Cluster Collaboration platform, so we really tried to share it, because this is what I feel really deep in my heart, that we need to learn and share from each other. And so it's open source, and you can tap into it and also give me some feedback if you see this differently. So
excellent. Okay, let's go to the second part of this webinar, the living with the pandemic, where we are now. What is the new support that clusters need from economic development organizations? How are they aligning policy actions with cluster needs? Merete, your turn.
Yes, thank you, Patricia. So as you can see, we really went online ourselves and did a lot of digital things. Perhaps we learned that knowledge sharing isn't more difficult, perhaps it's a bit the opposite. And so that was a really good learning from our own side. We have facilitated quite a range of meetings over the last 2.5 months, I think at least one per week. Of course, we had a lot about how to handle the crisis, but we definitely need to keep also a discussion going on the consolidation process and the communication, globalization, as I mentioned. And then we had a range of task force meetings on really nerdy stuff related to the applications and the consolidations. But the best part is that we managed to engage high level all our cluster managers during this period, because now they had the time and there was a big interest in talking about normal stuff and normal cluster stuff, and not all just related to the coronavirus, but related to the living the pandemic. As I mentioned before, that has been a really big interest from many stakeholders and economic development organizations in the ecosystem. and that's been both national and international, to be both closer to the clusters and also to see them as part of the restart. So it's not like something we pushed, it actually more or less came to us. And I hope this is also like a good sign for humanity and all of us, that there's been a big interest in reaching out and saying, okay, this is bad, and how do we use each other, and how do we see like the next phase in this. Yes, can you take the next slide?
Yes.
Yeah, but one bigger thing we did is that we think about what the kind of services the clusters are providing, and we did this another tool that we need to, okay, how are the clusters actually rethinking innovation as a response to this? And this is another online infographic that we can share. And we think about the different services the clusters are providing. So you can also go to the next slide, Patricia. So
yes,
and we can
by the way, Kaspar is writing in the chat the link to the publications.
Yeah, he's my big supporter, also with the ICT. Yes. So yeah, but so we can see like 4 trends on how the services changed. So one was that the clusters was adapting already planned activities to the new situation. But then they also, and that was for us a good sign of the clusters, were able to adapt new activities that could support the companies. And as Werner said, there was a big interest from the companies and also a big gratitude. We could especially see the clusters in the health sector, because a lot of money was also pushed out. You know, we want to be more innovative, more private foundations found extra money, and also foundations found money, especially for entrepreneurs and startups, companies that are really struggling, has really been struggling over the last 2 months. What we also seen in the Danish case, that the feedback from the clusters is that the companies are still interested in innovation. So it's not like from innovation just going back to, you know, survival and doing business, but saying, okay, innovation is an integrated part of how we try to handle this. So we also see some innovation projects being more pushed and actually not cancelled. So that was also great for us. And then everything has really been digitalized. So a great push for all of the clusters, and not just the more digital ones. And then for the next one, if we go a bit deeper, Patricia, then as I mentioned at the beginning, a core activity in the Danish cluster context is this push on innovation. So for us, it's always interesting to see, okay, how is that core task in our system responding? So one is on innovation projects. It's about classical research projects, but also pre-projects, feasibility studies, and smaller bubble projects. And actually for the new call, this is not just classical innovation projects driven from university and knowledge institution side, but we will also see more B2B element in the new application. And we really expect a lot from that, and it's very interesting to see this, how this develops. But we could see the clusters are still providing that and still doing that, and especially on the life science, there was a big interest in pushing for more and more innovation projects. Then on the knowledge dissemination, it's also a core activity in our cluster landscape. So of course, the 18,000 companies I mentioned in the beginning are a very important target group for our clusters, but it's also pushing knowledge in broader to society. And we can see many of the clusters really took that up, trying to doing online session for instance, like at our lifestyle and design cluster, where they met with retail city managers that were in a big crisis because our cities basically shut down overnight. And they were actually able to do like a very nice exchange of ideas and challenges, and also defining new areas of trying to handle this. And they themselves, in the design and cluster, were not, you know, experts on ICT, but they said, okay, we're here. Should we have a morning meeting, have a coffee, discuss what is happening? And they were extremely surprised surprised both of the numbers of companies joining, but also of the level of solutions that came out of those discussions. Yeah, so let's move on. And then, of course, access to financing has been an interest. So both, of course, on the eight packages, but we could also see that many of our bigger private foundations pushed out more money and also using clusters as part of the response to what is happening here. Again, a good, very nice thing from our design cluster is that they actually found their own money in their own cluster, so they could help to fund entrepreneurs that were really struggling because they finally made that one piece of something that could go to market and they were out of money. So in this case, the clusters were actually able to find their own money and help the entrepreneurs. Another area that, of course, also has been struggling is on the incubation entrepreneurship. Many of clusters actually over the later years moved a lot into that. It was not an integrated part of the cluster program some years ago, but more and more clusters, and that perhaps came out of the financial crisis some years ago. We could see the cluster's role on incubation and entrepreneurship. And we have some really nice examples of clusters providing things and using existing facilities and offering hotline solutions for the ones struggling right now.
Excellent. Werner, we want to hear from you.
Yeah, maybe just there was a question whether those employees were of us or involved in the cluster.
Yes.
And just to give you the perspective on that, I mean, we have around about 65 people in our cluster department. So most of the people working in our cluster department were actually part of this task force. And it was quite a challenge to keep those persons up to date with the information about those relief packages. I don't know how your governments and structures work, but here in Austria, it's like this, that the politicians, they make a press conference and announcing things, but it takes a while until you get actually all the documents and all the bureaucracy behind that. So, and this time lag can be quite challenging because companies are wanting to have immediate response to whatever they read in the paper, and it's just not ready there. And when you reach out to thousands of regional companies, you need to make sure that you do not call a company twice or different people interfere with each other. So the knowledge management part of this whole structure with everyone being in home office was quite also an IT challenge to set up databases and infrastructure on that, because on regular basis we don't have really a call center here. We have just a regular telephone system that is operating not in a call center mode. So that was quite challenging, but quite rewarding, because especially the companies not being part of a cluster brackets yet, they were most grateful, because they said, well, we appreciated a lot that you also in times of crisis actually reaching out to us, being not even a member of those clusters yet. So I think we planted a lot of seeds for future growth there. Now a little bit more to the specific parts of what did the clusters actually do, and it was a lot coming down to mobilizing resources for actual very urgent demands here in the situation, because like in many countries, like personal protective equipment was in short demand. The Chinese would not ship those stuff over. We had situations where even some equipment was there in Germany or Italy, stuck there for various other reasons. So what the cluster staff did was trying to mobilize resources to shift production for this kind of equipment within days actually. And like in the top hand picture, you see this surgery suits, and actually the plastics cluster, they were mobilizing from a company that is usually producing the machinery for specific plastic films. They had machinery equipment in the laboratory for this kind of material, and basically and virtually overnight they changed the settings. They called in their staff, and they were refocusing their production on this kind of specific textiles. They were usually just for testing stuff on the operational side, and they're not in the business of producing textiles at all, but their business is usually machinery. Second example was, for example, a company usually providing firefighting equipment and producing firefighting helmets, were developing this kind of face shields. Also, within a few days, they were designing the whole product, were producing the tools, and were shifting productions towards this equipment actually within a few days, with the support of our clusters, bringing our extra suppliers, tool makers, whatsoever. Or also a third example was this face masks, reusable face masks, also an innovation from cluster companies together along the value chain to come up with actually solutions within a very, very short days by coordination of cluster member staff, which I think came to the point where we realized, oh wow, this is actually really amazing. If a crisis is really here, how fast, without any bureaucracy and many questions asked, companies actually get to the point of helping the overall economy and the overall system quite fast. And I'm quite convinced that this kind of flexibility and innovation capabilities shown in times of crisis can be a resource for further competitive advantages in the future, where I'm expecting the future, well, the way back will be probably more difficult and longer than we all might wish it would be.
Thank you. We have one more question about resiliency measures or models that you can recommend, particularly to help small, medium enterprises to bounce back. And August Melody is talking about measures and models that can help enterprises face any future emerging pandemic. Something about that you can recommend, Werner, Merete?
Well, my first wish is we will not face such a pandemic or such a situation again. I mean, that's of course the first answer to that. Actually, I mean, what we are trying to do and what we are looking, and we will see that on the future slides then, I mean, we are very carefully, I mean, first of all, we are in the lucky situation, we have a very strong manufacturing base still here in that region, which means production capabilities, resources, innovation resources are quite strong. So there is the possibility to shift and to diversify in various regions and areas, also for small and medium-sized companies, which if we help them, and as Merete mentioned, especially in our medical devices and medical technology cluster, I mean, there is a lot of interest from, let's say, automotive supply companies. They were hit probably the hardest at the moment to make a transition towards this kind of markets and this kind of products, and where our companies and our clusters actually helping them to gain access to this kind of markets, to this kind of technologies, to this kind of certification processes, because what we learned also in during the last crisis is actually no one is really waiting also in those markets for new entrances and for new incumbents to compete against existing value chains. So this is not so easy to get around.
Yeah, I could just add to that. I think in the Danish case, our perspective on this is that, of course, we don't hope for another pandemic here. I mean, but for us, like, clusters are part of the solution, and we hope that, you know, and we measured quite intensively of this over the years. Companies in clusters are more productive, they're more innovative. We hope to see that they're also more resilient. Let's see about that. And then we also hope that the clusters and the cluster organizations are able to both work with the investor side, and we see more signs of that right now, that since some of that is quite disrupted right now, that there are more actually available money around, and the cluster organizations can also help to attract funding and money. So we hope that's a good sign, and we also hope that the cluster systems is part of the bigger ecosystem and support system in Denmark, so that they can attract more funding from for innovation projects or for matchmaking or forever. So we hope that clusters are one of the best models for this. We will not know for sure, but we hope it's part of the tool package for the crisis.
Yeah, we're quite sure that I think our clusters will play a vital role in the future, probably even more important when the systems are more disrupted than in the past.
Werner, a very specific question to you. How about Austria's helping business in getting finance? Can you elaborate a little bit more on that?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, we have a very traditional financing structure on a very continental system, which means there is not a lot of, our capital markets are quite underdeveloped. Our stock exchange is rather small. The typical companies are debt financed by banks, family-owned businesses with quite a high level of actually equity from a family and stuff. So it's, I think, on an overall basis, there's a solid financing structure. But we help, of course, those companies to gain access to all the different relief activities there are on a European side. From the European Investment Bank, we were also before the crisis helping companies there. On the national side, we have, of course, banks, funding banks owned by the national government that are offering guaranteed loans by the state to obtain liquidity to companies, and also on the regional side. Here in Upper Austria are specific programs for strengthening equity within those companies. We don't fund them, we just help companies to gain access, to get the right application to the right person, and we are more or less doing this kind of assistance to all of those companies. And as I mentioned, not just to the companies that are cluster members or we've been working there before already, in where we had very close ties, but also to let's say all of them. I mean, of course, we cannot do it all, but to whoever comes, and we're trying to reach out on a broad scale. That's why resources are quite actually dense here in our structure, in our organization, and we changed activities quite a lot. I mean, usually we do 350 events, seminars, whatsoever a year. That has come down to 0. I mean, of course, we do those online seminars, webinars, whatsoever, but the presence one, it's come down to 0. And we're shifting those resources in helping companies in the short run to obtain liquidity, but in the mid and long term to obtain actually competitive advantages through innovation. And this is basically what we've been doing for the last 20 years, but I think it will be even more crucial and important in the future.
Thanks, Werner. Paquita Lamacraft is here posting a very concrete collaboration also on respirators. I think we have plenty of examples all over the world on how this social need was covered in a very open and collaborative way by many big companies, let's say, or most competitive companies. There's a concrete question, Merete, maybe you can cover this, if we have any cluster-to-cluster collaboration taking place at international level in this way?
Yeah, we have really many. So it's in the Danish case, we have many because, I mean, as I said, I mean, many of the ongoing projects, they were canceled, like Werner said, again, came to zero. So no travels to Japan or Brazil or Canada. So you need to reinvent, I mean, how to keep that dialogue going. And as I said, Enterprise Youth Network has an online tool, and there's the different online tools that's been available for some of our Danish clusters, and they'll be using them for investor pitching or kickstarting international knowledge collaboration projects. Yeah, we have a wide range of examples. I think it's part of the tool that my colleague Casper just posted. And I would like to see that we take that to the next level, and I hope somebody take a lead on saying, okay, how can we also use clusters and on the global collaboration kickstart again, because there's definitely a potential for that, because clusters have this kind of interactions already.
Excellent. We have more questions. I will take one for the next, probably maybe a next webinar about Sub-Saharan Africa. I think none of our speakers today is so active in Sub-Saharan Africa, but let's take this. We want to do something more specific on Africa and cover more specificities with African experts also, and to engage on what's going on in this region of the world. Okay. And Stephen also asks, should we be considering innovation cluster policy or entrepreneurial cluster policy? Maybe the two of them can go together. I don't know. What do you think?
Definitely. I mean, in our case and in my understanding, those things go together as twins. I mean, you cannot really have one without the other ones. And we make a clear distinction between innovation and invention. And we, in our organization, we always make very clear that although we operate 11 non-university R&D centers with 650 R&D staff within our regional development agency, for us it's quite clear, it's just called an innovation if you have the entrepreneurial part within it, and just to develop the next big thing. It's if you cannot sell it, if there is no market, if you don't really have it on your balance sheet at the end, it's not called an innovation, it's just an invention. So those things go together hand in hand.
Yeah, I fully agree with Werner. I think in the Danish case, we were perhaps a bit, for many years, too focused on, just innovation coming from the university side, on the knowledge push side. And I think in the later year, we also learned that we need to really engage with the fully picture of this, and also having the entrepreneurs and the investors as a more integrated part of the cluster policy. And this is what the current call that we have out right now is actually reflecting. So we try to say innovation is the umbrella, and entrepreneurs are part of that, and they should be really integrated in the ecosystem, and it's an integrated part of what we do. And I think, and I hope that we in the later years also recognize more that innovation is not like just high level long-term things. And this is hopefully also what you will find in our infographic on the rethinking innovation, that sometimes small things matter. And we see some nice examples of Austria here, that it might not be a really something that we need to wait for in 2 or 3 years, but it can actually be just changing some things or rethinking and then we have a smaller innovation. So that's kind of the Danish approach to this.
Yeah.
Okay, still more questions, but let me go through the last part of the presentation. Maybe we cover some of them with this. The last phase is igniting new growth. And the questions we have prepared today are: how can economic development organizations help clusters to transform or to reposition? And what new dynamics are emerging? And what new roles can economic development organizations play in the new normal? Start with Merete.
Yes, thank you, Patricia. Yeah, so what I should perhaps also mention at the beginning, that part of our consolidation in Denmark is that really saying that clusters should be independent. And that's been a core driver in the consolidation we have been trying to support over the last 2 years. So the ones applying for the national program now needs to be have own legal entities, have own boards steered by companies. Because we actually had a lot of data showing that it's not the best idea that they are embedded in other organizations, and they should really be able to reach out to their own ecosystems and not depend on any kind of host. So for us, this is also a little bit of partnership, it is a partnership. So it's not like us telling them. So it's also, the clusters have a lot of intelligence right now. They know a lot about what is happening. And this is also the purpose of some of the first Zoom meetings and dialogue discussions we had with them, saying, but what is happening on the ground? How are the sectors responding? How are the companies reacting? And this is where the matchmaking really come into place, that they know, I mean, everybody in the ecosystem and can set up things very nice and actively. And this is, sorry, just in Danish, but so you can see. But some years ago, we did a matchmaking tool because it's a core competence, a core tool for the clusters. And we saw, as I also said before, many clusters now pushing those things online, doing networking meetings online and workshop meetings online. So of course, we're all in favor of meeting, but perhaps we also learned now that it is actually possible and sometimes even better to meet online. So it's a part of the learning we're still focusing on now. And I know my colleagues are talking about doing an extra matchmaking tool just for online. I mean, how do we do online matchmaking in the most optimal way? And then perhaps trying to answer your question, Patricia, on the transition. So we perhaps right now are a little bit in this, okay, what is happening phase and how do we reposition? The former role of the clusters was about digitalization and circular economy. So also reaching out to bigger agendas and not like just promoting growth and innovation in their own sector, but also trying to deal with bigger challenges around us. And that's a big expectation now also for the call out now. So anybody applying for in environment or in life science or in food, they will need to give responses to how will this cluster work with circular economy or digitalization. So just one example of this is a broader challenge that the clusters need to tackle. Yes, so next one. So one of the things we've been discussing is this pamphlet we did half a year ago, but it seems like forever somehow. But we could see the clusters play a big role in the circular economy. And a bit to our surprise that it was not just in our Danish case clusters in the green technologies or energy that were focused on this area, but it's basically all clusters. So also the design cluster, the fintech, education technology, animation, everybody was interested in, okay, what is our role or take on that? So we did this nice pamphlet. It's in English, and I'll try and show it. No, I cannot show it, but it's here, and we will also send you a link. Some nice cases from Europe and some nice data on why a cluster is important in this and how can they help SMEs in that transition. And we can see some of the first clusters are taking on that discussion again. So, okay, now we handle the crisis. now we are reopening a bit in Denmark, and how do we see the next phase, and are we able to kickstart the economy and combine green transition? And so this is a bit a tricky or a discussion we're having right now. So trying to ignite new growth. I mean, you can hear we don't have a clear direction on this, but I guess what has helped us over the last 2.5 months is what we will keep on doing. We have a lot of ongoing dialogues, both with the clusters to say what is happening, and also a lot of dialogue with the different stakeholders around us, our system. So last week, for instance, I met with our global innovation centers around the world saying, okay, how do we kickstart our global value chains? How can we, that was on the agenda anyway, to strengthen the collaboration between our clusters and our innovation centers. But how do we kickstart, how would you rebuild, how we do this better for the next phase? We also been a lot in dialogue with the Enterprise Youth Network. Actually in the early phases, we shared some requests coming in for Lombardy on you know, the terrible situation coming there, but we also talked about how do we kickstart the global value chains for the next phase. We also been in dialogue with Nordic Innovation, that is like an umbrella organization for the 5 Nordic countries. They just yesterday sent us, okay, on the circular business model, they're offering new programs for the Nordic countries, and can you share this with the cluster so they can share to the companies? Next week we have a meeting with our National Innovation Fund. It's a governmental fund, but it's also have like an own framework, and they have of course also pushed out a lot of aid packages, but also actually reinvented their own innovation tools, and that's part of the dialogue. We actually had a meeting just before the big lockdown, and now next week we'll talk about what are the next packages all about, and what kind of tools do we need to focus on now to kickstart or ignite the growth. We've also been in close dialogue with the EU cluster team. I'm part of the EU cluster expert group, and we've been trying to be creative, thinking about, okay, what is the new situation? How do we kickstart in different areas? It's not been super easy, I must say, but at least we try to be looking ahead, saying what comes now, how has the cluster responded, how can we use those responses, and what lies ahead of us. So trying to be a little bit, okay, what are the new roles? It's definitely a lot about trying to be faster. So we might be on a lockdown here, but I think we worked super hard. And so had the clusters and everybody in the public system on this. We can also see it's less bureaucratic. So some of the normal rules have been eased, and that's nice. We also see more connected because we have more time, and there's bigger interest in reaching out and discussing. We can see more investors coming in now. It's not somebody we directly talk to, but the clusters have been in a very nice dialogue with many of the investors saying there's an interest, and can we, you know, do some kind of events together with your companies and trying to ignite as well. So I hope an outcome of this is even stronger ecosystems, and the clusters in Denmark can take a leading role on that.
Thank you, Merete. Very good reflections. Werner, what can you tell us from your case?
Well, I mean, first of all, I fully agree with everything what Merete said, with one exception. We are not fond of online meetings anymore, at least I have to admit. I'm really happy to meet real people, to look real people into the eyes and have real conversations and not staring at screens for all week long. So that's the only objection I have.
And the beer, Werner, also.
Of course. Yeah, and that's also very good that restaurants and bars open 2 weeks here, 2 weeks ago here again in Austria. So, I mean, what everyone here is talking about, it's nothing less than a real reconstruction of the economy. I mean, we just celebrated 75 years of the end of World War II here in Austria. I mean, and 56 years of our state treaty when we became independent again after 10 years of occupation by Russia, Americans, and so on. And the whole situation after World War II is actually quite well, real here, because I mean, Austria was suffering very hard, and everyone lost quite a lot of relatives and family in those conflicts. And the years after the war are probably a little bit more into the society than maybe in other regions. So the whole concept of reconstruction after the World War II, the whole talks about the Marshall Plans are here quite real. And when Merete was talking about innovation, I think we will see a lot of innovation going on when we talk about business model adjustment, business model transformation, and also industry transformation as part of innovation. We're not just talking about technical innovations, but also about changing business models, also to the next level. And there was a question in the chat talking about what about the economy? What about the green economy? What about actually the climate crisis we are having on parallel to this health, to this economic, to this hopefully not, but probably a coming financial crisis? We have a climate crisis on parallel going on. And for us, it's quite clear that all those innovation activities need to be more sustainable than in the past. All the relief packages, all the innovation programs, and we probably will see quite a bit of them in order to come out of those crises, need to incorporate the whole thing of green growth, of sustainable development, of sustainable technology and circular economy, and what there is. Not because it's nice, and not because in our case we have also the Green Party in the government, but because it's one source of competitiveness. And I think this is also something, when there was the question about the sub-Saharan Africa, I think this is also those concepts, those principles are also there, maybe on a different technology level, maybe on a different implication level, maybe on different players and different institutions whatsoever. But the whole concept of this, I think, is there again. And our role of the cluster, I think, is definitely more feasible than it was in the past, because we measure the success of our clusters in how intense cooperative projects they are initiating over time. It's the success of our cluster. It's not when we have members on the list paying their annual fees. It's about how many times those clusters bring actual companies and R&D research facilities whatsoever together to engage in common innovation. And I think the role of the cluster is more needed in the future as a facilitator there. And we are preparing for more than 100. We are aiming for more than 150 of these projects per year, even today, even in 2020 and the years to follow, with a closer cooperation with our R&D centers, or we as a RDA are actually operating. Next slide, please. What is our problem, or what is the limitation? The limitation is, probably for us, it's even more important what Germany is doing than what the national government in Austria is doing, than what the regional government is doing. We depend so much on international markets. 2/3 of our GDP is derived from exports. So if Germany is losing its role of the economic engine in Europe, we are really, really in the ditch. So to a certain extent, it's just for us, we depend a lot on those resources, on how the overall international situation is developing, how open our markets will be in the future. And so we can do our little share to contribute, but to be honest, we depend a lot on what others and what the international community and what especially what Germany, of course, is doing and how they will proceed over time. And of course, to be honest, I mean, what we really fear is that after 8 years of Marcel Hirscher is winning the Ski World Cup and then was killed from Norway, that the Swiss are winning again the Ski World Cup. So that would be a real catastrophe for our nation, since yeah, we really do care about skiing. So that's the worst fear we have. But what we hope for is, and I think clusters did contribute a lot to mint this new currency called trust in our region in the last 20 years. We saw the examples of those projects I showed you. They were purely established on trust. There were no contracts or no lawyers to set up lengthy contracts on those projects. They were based on the trust of people in the region agreeing to do something together, to be really fast, to cut red tape, to cut corners in order to help and to contribute to those relief packages. And I'm quite convinced that trust will be a new currency in this new normal, as they would call it. And I think that the institutions, and I'm a big fan of Amiodarone and this book you see on the slides, because it more or less states the role of institutions in the economic performance and in the prosperity of regions and nations. And I'm quite convinced that clusters actually can be one of those strong institutions in the future, because they are creating this new currency called trust there. And I think we are comparable, well equipped with this kind of new currency. So yeah, the next slide, please. Concluding, for me, it's just one statement which I also use in internal meetings, that also in being positive in a negative situation is not naive, it's leadership. And I think this is what actually we will need in the future, also coming out of clusters for the future of regional value chain. It is about leadership and not passing on the hot potato to the other people and saying, oh, it's the politicians, it's those international institutions, it's whatever. No, it's leadership in terms of real people in the region.
Excellent. Thank you very much, the both of you. This was really great. Let me go again to some of the questions that we have from the audience. There is one from Marco Llenas from Bogota, asking how do you balance, or how do you find a balance to address the urgent needs from the crisis, from the companies, from all the difficulties they are going through, and this more strategic thinking of transitioning, or thinking about the future and so on. How is it in your case, Merete? How do you think the clusters in Denmark have dealt with that? Sorry, we cannot hear you.
This is part of the journey we've been on in Denmark for the last 2 years, really underlining to build a stronger ecosystem. So just to give you a picture of what we're looking at right now. So the first of those consolidated clusters we have is actually 400 paying members. And we actually talk more about, and just also reflecting a bit on what I said about the leadership, is that for many years we stressed the role of the cluster manager as on the facilitating and the matchmaking, on the neutral networker, and that's still important. But I think building on top, and I think the Corona crisis underlined that, the role of the leadership, And this is where I hope that the clusters in Denmark have really proper CEOs in place, and we start calling them CEOs and not cluster managers, because they need to step up to extremely big challenges, both on the consolidated clusters and on the current crisis we are dealing with. So it's perhaps not the role of cluster excellence Denmark to try to make them keep that strategic, balance, but we hope that the clusters we have worked with so intensively over the last 10 years, 15 years, are now in a stronger position to take those discussions. And they have just right now made new strategies, and they are in this transition on rethinking also the economy. So leadership is definitely in the cluster management is important.
Well, maybe in our case, it's quite easy. I mean, since we, dealing with the innovation part, it's more or less on our own tool we have. We don't have money for equity or relief packages or whatsoever. It's just the whole toolbox of helping companies with their innovation activities that is actually in our backpack. So, of course, we come in the door with all different other questions the companies are having, but how do we go more or less with an innovation agenda? Because that's the only piano we are actually playing in, and at the end, it always pays off.
One question is about, I think, for the question comes from different places, Bangladesh, MENA countries, but how can this, let's say, more developing countries continue their cluster development activities in this situation? What is your reflection or your advice to them?
Well, I think what worked in the Danish case all along, and of course we have these extremely big, very superpower clusters now, but we also have new players coming in, and just next Friday I'm meeting with our education technology people, and I don't think they're going to be part of our national program, and it's basically 40 clusters in a really small ecosystem. And they have, of course, experienced really nice, interest in their products now, because many things are pushed online now in the educational sector. And I think a good way right now is really to try to keep the dialogue and create daily meetings, hourly or weekly meetings, saying, okay, what is happening right now, and how can we facilitate and help and support in the best manner. And perhaps also reflecting a bit more on Marco's question, that of course the urgent need comes first. I mean, we need to help the businesses. We need to help make sure this, doesn't turn into a deeper crisis. And then we know for extremely many analysis, I must say, in Denmark, we spend a lot of money on doing analysis, that clusters is among the best tool we have in the toolbox. So the challenge on the broader scale is not that it doesn't really work. It's about, understanding what it doesn't work and how we mend it, but also sharing the power of collaboration. And this is where the TCI hopefully comes into play, that we have so many experts and have so much knowledge and also know about the failures in this. So on the more early clusters, and if you are in the early phases, I would keep the dialogue going and reach out and say, okay, how can we help you now? How can we set up small programs? How can we help you to meet? How can we also make new strategies around this and speed up, because we need some kind of speeding up.
Definitely, I fully agree. One of the biggest tasks of every cluster manager whatsoever, in my experience, is aligning expectations between the different actors and players. And especially when times are there, a lot of different expectations come along. some say, well, you need to lobby the government for this or that. The other one is, you need to find us and bring us new customers. The other one say, you need to do this or to do that. And it's all about aligning expectations. It's about communication a lot in order to bring actually companies together to establish trust. And my experience is, how do you actually establish trust? It's more or less you promise and deliver. You commit on something, you agree we do this or that together, and then you deliver. And you start out sometimes very, very small, because you cannot really, well, you can sign a document saying now we trust each other, but it doesn't help. You need to develop trust by promising and delivery. And you start up small, and then you get to the next, to the bigger, and that's how you actually go from one rather small kind of common adventure to the next point, to the next higher thing. And that's how you develop this kind of trust over time. And that's, I think, one of the most important things also in those days, where a lot of different ideas spread around what organizations like clusters should do.
One more question is about global value chains, more sustainable value chains. How can clusters play a stronger role in the recovery plan with a new proactive approach to promote these new sustainable value chains in and across regions?
How much time is there left?
10 minutes. But you can just give us some general ideas on this. Yeah, I think we need to work more together to cover this properly.
Yeah. It's a good question, probably worth another webinar, Patricia. So, but I think
taking a lot of ideas.
Yeah, exactly. It's great for us. But I think, as I said in my presentation, the interest is still there. So it's not like going from 100 to 0. So it's just a matter of some of the clusters, getting a bit of time to get the urgent crisis situation under control. Then we will see that collaboration starting again. And I mean, I'm also like Werner in favor of the personal meeting, but I think perhaps some of the online tools that we learned the hard way now can actually support or supplement the efforts, especially globally, because there has been a lot of time spent on traveling and meeting, and sometimes sitting with a lot of jet lag in the meeting might not be the best way of defining, can we build trust and can we start a collaboration? So I think it can supplement or in some cases also replace what we've seen before. And in my experience, this will not replace classical clustering. This is not what we see in my country. Perhaps even more, like the more global they are, the more even in my small country, with 5 million people, it's very flat. We're very connected. We still discuss how many offices do we have for the clusters. And I know it's something that even our ministers care about. So it's not like, okay, you might go to Japan, but you still need 3 offices around Denmark. So it's still that dialogue we have in my country.
Yeah, I mean, in our country, with experiencing, even having a strong manufacturing basis, we don't have any personal protective equipment available, and having problems having access to ventilators and those kind of things. Politicians are talking about bringing back certain critical value chains whatsoever. But I mean, to be honest, I think one of the biggest sources of prosperity in mankind is the division of labor, and is trade on a bigger level, and is the specialization of certain regions, of certain resources in certain areas. So when we talk about reshaping global value chains, I think we need to be really careful not to get rid of free trade, of setting up barriers, tariff barriers whatsoever, because I mean, we're all coming from times where we had tariffs and trade barriers and whatsoever, and it actually never really helped the overall prosperity there. So we need to be really, really careful about talking about this kind of reshaping global value chains. I think it's much more meant in the terms of flexibility. I think our manufacturing, our supplies, our whatsoever value chains need to get more flexibility, need to be more fluid again, because nationalistic protective measurements, and we are actually on the verge of a lot of them, and we are, I mean, we're seeing what's going on in China and America and between those two countries every day. So I don't think this is not really a solution. So because it's bringing us back many, many years. And I'm from a country where the European Union enlargement, we were the biggest profiter of joining the European Union and the extension of the European Union to the greater Europe, with all the free trade and the free movement of goods and services and people that is in there. And I see those kind of benefits actually quite in danger. So I think we have to talk more about free trade and less about new value chains. That's my personal opinion on that.
And linked to this, and I promise then we move to another topic, is reshoring or nearshoring, so the supply chain reconfiguration, part of the debate in your regions?
Well, I think it's the same kind of debate like Werner says that we have in Denmark, and I don't see that's like, let's not go back. I mean, we need to think about how there might be some areas where we learned it the hard way, but in general, the Danish perspective is that we benefited from this, and we might need to rethink a bit on the life science sector and the protective thing. It might be I sense that a more political boss and not like, you know, in real, grounded in real life. So let's see how long that lasts. But I think in terms of how clusters and our manufacturing cluster, they just say, yeah, but we are still here and we still need to develop, you know, what we've been doing all along. And that's in that respect, not the biggest change in what we've been doing. So then keep on doing and trying to really right now engage in the sustainability issue, saying, yeah, but we know this has cost like a lot of money. I think the calculation is then in Denmark that we spend the 2 years on the financial crisis, that amount of money in 2 months. So we need to really rethink on how we are smarter in the next phase, because we will not have a lot of money available for doing the transition to a more sustainable economy. So that's part of how we need to be more creative and think about how are clusters actually responding to that. We see some clusters now measuring actually the CO2 emission from the companies. So that's actually a KPI in one of the clusters now, saying, yeah, so it's still about innovation and things like that, but it's also about CO2 emission in the companies and how the clusters projects are actually helping to that. So and I can see more of the projects coming out now are aligned, saying sustainability is still on. We cannot just go back to the old normal or the old model on high growth, high spending, too much CO2 emission. We might in Denmark, you know, be very, you know, think we are nice and clean, but we're actually extremely polluting. I mean, we have nothing to be proud about. We have all the reasons to work extremely hard on this. Yeah.
Nothing to add. Nothing to add there. The same is true here, and I think we need to be realistic and also open about those kind of things, and not too romantic to a time when you would go to the regional shoemaker and buy your kind of regional made shoes with leather from the regional cow, carving on the regional grass. So I think this there is progress being made by mankind in the past, but I think the future needs to be much more sustainable, and the growth needs to be much greener than in the past. And as also what Merete was saying about Denmark is true about our region. So there is really a lot we can we can do in order to be more sustainable on this planet.
Mm-hmm. One last question, and maybe we extend 5 more minutes, but I think it's important, and it's back to cluster life. Most of this is a question from Takalani Ratiyaya. Most of clusters initiatives are membership based, but we are now being asked to extend some cluster support services to non-member firms. How do you deal with that? What do you think? Shall the clusters work for the members or beyond the members for the businesses in their ecosystem?
It's another nice big question, but let's try and be swift here. In my opinion, I think this is part of the cluster thinking and also related a bit to the trust issue that Werner also addressed several times. That so, of course, as a cluster manager, and this is where the management and leadership comes into play, so you, of course, need to focus on the members to keep them happy, but it's also extremely important that you share what you've been doing so clusters don't turn into closed clubs for high-paying members. So sharing your knowledge and your insights through the broader community. You can work on the business model for that. So we can also say, yeah, but this is knowledge or projects you want to share, and non-members are able to join for conferences or events or be part of the afterwards knowledge sharing on the outcome of a project. And I know that's an integrated part of the Danish program. So it's not like just, you know, giving taxpayers money to a closed club of companies, but push this into the broader system and actually raise the whole level of innovation in the country.
Well, I'm quite clear. I'm quite clear about that. I mean, trust comes from being generous at the first time, which means we always in our clusters were reaching out to a lot of companies and didn't care whether they were members or not in the first place, whether they were within the region of Upper Austria or in Lower Austria or the Czech Republic or in Bavaria. As long as they had interest in our activities, we were reaching out to them and we were inviting them to participate. And in the long run, as when you are generous and you give, you will be given, which means over time, those companies actually see what they have and see the benefit, and they will either become member of the cluster or collaborate or bring in and give in other ways in order to contribute to the overall structure. So it's, I think, in cluster management, you need to be generous in the first place, and then it will come back. And it's always, I was very, when I was the plastics cluster manager, I was many times fighting with my board about this issue about those, no, you cannot do this, and they are not members and they're not paying their fee and stuff. And I think in the long run, it always worked out being generous at first and getting in the fruits later on.
Excellent. Sorry, we cannot answer the rest of the questions today online, but let's do it in written. I promise we will give you some answers after this to the ones that have contributed. Thank you very much for the audience. I really felt close to all of you. And I felt, well, you all made very valuable contributions. And thank you to Merete and to Werner. I give you a virtual applause on behalf of all the,
thank you.
all the participants. And well, thank you all. Just a reminder, the TCI Oceania conference is going live in their third and last forum next Thursday. You can see all the details in our website. Please, well, if you are interested also in following the Oceanian practitioners and some of the specificities there, just very welcome to join. And for the rest of us, see you in the next global webinar, and to our members in our gatherings soon. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.